Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, October 12th. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day for Forward Maryland. This is Bill Woodcock,
I'm Jason Boones.
and we are pleased this evening to have with us a return guest to the program. He is a candidate for the Howard County Board of Education for District 1. He is Matthew Molyett. Matthew, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Bill. It's good to be here.
And I thank you for taking your time out 22 scant days before the election and about 10 days, give or take, before early voting starts in Howard County and throughout Maryland. I know we talked back in the early phases of the pandemic back in the spring. I guess the first place to start is tell us how are things been going these last few months.
Well, it's been extremely busy, but tonight was a good time to make time for this since we're now after dark and it's been an awful nasty rain there. Leading up till today, most of my evenings have been pushing walking neighborhoods, like right up until as long as I felt comfortable. It was mostly like, am I going to encounter an angry household for approaching their porch in the dark to leave literature? And I've been risking it, and it hasn't been a problem yet. But today, with this weather, it was a good time to take a little break, have a chat.
Well, we're glad you're here. And so tell us a little bit about that experience, about getting out to walking in neighborhoods in your community, especially since the differences between you and your opponent are so stark in terms of your visions for Howard County Public Schools. How have you been received?
I've been received quite well. One household, I got confronted about my statements regarding school resource officers, and the gal I was talking to was concerned. She pointed to her son's car in the driveway and told me that he was a police officer, and as such, that seemed to carry an implication of where she would stand on the issue. Mm-hmm. And I found the implication disappointing because my issues with school resource officers stem not from a problem with police, and it's more a philosophy of education. And our schools are full of students that are learning how to be adults and people. A big part of the learning process, whether at school or anywhere else in your teenage years, is mistakes. Lots and lots of mistakes. I'm sure both of you can remember that from your times. And yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Right. But since our students will be making mistakes, a lot of them, dealing with the impulses of teenage years and all that, we need an education system that is aware and prepared for that. We need to approach concerns as discipline, not criminal matters, and with an eye towards helping students learn from their encounters and grow to be better and well-adjusted people. Having a badged officer in the school where, according to our memorandum, their primary duty is to enforce the law, ends up running very counter to providing education to our students. So that encounter out in the driveway had left me disappointed there because it implied that a concern about whether we're criminalizing school behavior turns into a negative animus towards police officers in general. And that was a disappointing exchange, and sadly I can't report back that I believe I've changed her mind into becoming a Molyett voter.
Well, as our comptroller Peter Francho would say, you can put her down as undecided. And so, given as that's one story, and as opposed to, I'm sure you've been to thousands of homes in your district, that I would say that's not too bad. And it's also, I find that refreshing and nice to have somebody who's not afraid to spend some time with people with whom he may not agree. I think that's terrific. If only everybody did the same. Sorry for the little bit of editorializing. I will penalize myself by passing the ball over to my esteemed co-host, Mr. Booms.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Matthew, I have a question for you. I mean, and this may help some of our maybe new viewers or listeners. Maybe they didn't catch your first show for whatever reason. But, since now you're 40% of the way to being in the 5 Timers Club, and the robes are fantastic, by the way. You're going to love them. One thing I've noticed when talking about the Board of Education, and just thinking electorally, every 4 years, an issue comes up or 2 issues come up. Sometimes they're of critical importance. Sometimes they're a bit more ephemeral. They're based on situational elements. For example, now redistricting is a huge part of the conversation, an important issue. The role of SROs, an important issue. But it seems as though oftentimes we get very, shall we say, reactive boards. They're elected, they come in, maybe they serve a term, they sort of deal with the immediate issue in front of them, but they often don't seem well equipped to deal with the ongoing day-to-day situations that are facing Howard County Public Schools. So I just wanted to give you a chance to be a bit more proactive and think about sort of what your vision is. Maybe you want to compare it to the incumbent's vision, and just, why do you think you're the better choice for the entirety of a full term serving on the Board of Education from the 1st District?
Yeah, your first description about how boards came in, that reminded me strongly of the election that had brought my opponent onto the board. There was that very reactive push to removing the superintendent. And they came in and, well, it happened. But for the duration of her term, there has been a real lack of addressing the concerns of the school day to day. Over that term, they've revisited and actually tried to find answers and solutions to the redistricting question twice, with the first time completely kicking the can down the road, and then the second time having, well, the process that we saw come out of it. Mm-hmm. And that really highlights what I feel that I can bring most effectively to the board, is that in my professional life and in my approach to parenting and co-parenting with my spouse, is problems get solved best by teams, and teams that participate. Following the removal of that superintendent, what we've seen is a long chain of just no responses, not just in the votes, but in the approach to the problem solving from our District 1 incumbent. Mm-hmm. And that's not how I see approaching problems. We need to, at the beginning of it, collect all of our information so that everybody on the team can look through and find where the suggestions they can make to advance it. Can they help refine each other's suggestions and cooperate and compromise and work through, always moving forward till the final point of having a solution that we all agree is an advancement and then we sign on, and then we announce that this is what we're doing, and we stick to it, and we follow through. And when you ask me in 3 years, what is something that my board has accomplished that I agree with, I'm going to have 3 years worth of problems that we've approached that I'll be able to point to any of them for you, because I will stand by what I did and what my team did, and I'll be proud of it because I will have participated in it.
I do have one follow-up, but just because you specifically raised the issue of being a parent. And I think what we've seen in some races in the cycle has been a attempted co-option of what it means to be a parent, and parents favor these candidates and parents don't like those candidates. But you're an actual parent. You've got kids. When you think about Howard County schools, what are you most concerned about, for your kids, for the friends of your kids? What do you see as maybe perhaps lacking in the system that's desperately needed to ensure that your children will receive a quality education?
Yeah. One, I would not presume to feel that I could speak for parents as a class. There's no way I could put together a single class that is going to be more diverse or more spread in their views and opinions than parents. But as your follow-on went regarding my status as a parent and what I've experienced, I can speak to. And as far as issues that influence the day-to-day of our students and my family and the families that I discuss with, what ends up impacting the kids is how we handle bullying and the general approach to discipline and providing for the needs of the kid, because when they're on their bus, that's a chance where it's one adult with a dedicated role, and then the students have a chance to really get in and interact as they will, which is unfortunately a fertile ground to be able to experience bullying and interact with it. That's a case that both my kids so far, as they've gone through elementary school, have had significant bullying incidents on the bus, because that environment is far too conducive to allowing for kids to get into what they will. So it ends up being, how do we respond to bullying when it has happened? How do we report it, track it, make sure to follow up on it? And our experience through 2 elementary schools, and there have been, our principals seem concerned, competent, and they focus on it quite nicely, and including like looking into it farther, and instead of dealing with the baseline, what happened right here, they do follow up with the children involved to see what can they do really for them, and address underlying issues rather than just the encounter, which is an important part of dealing with bullying. Rarely is the encounter at the time where the real story is.
And you raise a very good point on bullying. I'm just, which is another fantastic and highly salient issue. But just sort of thinking about your race for a quick moment, and the Board of Education in general, now that we're moving to a combination of district-based plus at-large seats, this election is so incredibly important because it has the potential to have the sort of the balance of power decided dysfunctional a progressive or a conservative majority on Howard County's Board of Education. So just thinking about basic principles, on that, whether you want to go with a science-based perspective or versus non-science-based, are there other key points of differentiation that you think really would identify stark differences between you and your opponent?
Me and my opponent differ significantly on approaches to inclusion and support for all of our students. Yeah, one really needs to look no farther than the Carey questionnaire and grading to see how we prioritize actually focusing on and meeting the needs of student groups that had face significant attention or systemic barriers. Mm-hmm. To see that my grade A of being able to accept and affirm our students and staff for who they are, versus her grade F about really her questionnaire deferred everything to just discussion of what policies are recorded rather than being willing to take a stand or state that affirming and supporting our students and staff is important. We see the same thing in the conversation that we recently had with one of the forums. Might have been League of Women Voters, or no, it was the Jack and Jill organization. Mm-hmm. Conversation. They asked the question regarding known racial disparities in suspension rate and discipline and arrest data. And they cited what the data had looked like in 2016. They cited how the trends had changed in that data up until 2018. And with clear, just stark, clear problems in racial disparities for suspension, arrest, and discipline that we've observed. And what we have observed is in collected data. We have it, we know it's a problem. Then the question was about how do we go forward addressing it? And when it came time for my opponent to respond, her response, as is her common pattern across most of what the Board of Education does at the time they need to make a decision, is we need to stop and collect data about this. The problem that was presented to us was, this is the problem we have. We can see it because it is in the data. We have the data that shows this problem exists. Do you care to address it? And how might you do that? And instead of taking a stand or suggesting any changes, she deferred to instead ask for more data. Mm-hmm. And asking for data and getting that in place is a first step in the process. It can't be the last step. And it gets brought up by my opponent to shut down, defer, delay, and obstruct. And my approach to problem solving is, yes, identify and collect the data. But once you have it, then you look at it, you act on it, you find out, you start brainstorming what are the solutions that we can do to change and reverse these trends. Mm-hmm. Having the data collection is great because that means we can see what the outcome is. We can continue to monitor it as things change, as our activity goes in. We can then follow up and see, are we having the changes that we're trying? But data collection at the next point it's a monitoring step. It's not the decision making.
Well, I was going to say, sorry. It does seem to be a case where this is a deliberate strategy that's being employed by your opponent, as opposed to actually wanting to seek out thoughtful responses to solutions that may actually impact our schools. It's very frustrating seeing someone who is acting in such a way where, I mean, the entire purpose appears to be sort of as an obstructionist rather than get anything done. And again, I'm just sort of going off my own rant for a minute, and I apologize for that. I know, Bill, you had a question.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of feeding off of that, Matthew. I mean, I'll count myself amongst the various people who supported all three of the Board of Education candidates who were elected in 2016, because I did. But while I can say that I saw Mavis Ellis and Kirsten Coons develop over those 4 years, I have not seen that development and growth from Christina Delmont Small. And you bring up one of those areas, and Jason was just talking about it, which is this incessant call for quote unquote data, which seems to be a buzzword, and it seems to also be a buzzword this year, not just in the District 1 race, but in others. And data in the Howard County public school system seems to be, the mail truck, and your opponent is the dog who, she catches, what's she going to do with it? So, this is kind of the problem I have here with this person. So how do you respond to those who say that you are, you are simply somebody, you're a progressive candidate, you've made no qualms about that. But how do you respond to those who say that you're just going to be a rubber stamp for some Democratic politicians or for the teachers union? Because in the time that we've talked tonight and in the time we talked back in the spring, I find lots of unique thought and really independent viewpoints and ways of looking at things.
Sorry, the thing I'd like to first address there, and if you can edit it out of the question and the answer, that'd be fine as well. But the choice,
Matthew, your sound is coming in very low.
The choice there to use the animal metaphor, I'm not sure is a good. It's not a good step in the discourse of a political conversation.
I would agree. It's not my usage. It's usage that I have seen in many a place of high discourse, including social media. So I apologize for any offense, not intentional.
I understand that. I wanted a chance to just express the disappointment about that. But honestly, I sort of got hung up on that as with the rest of the long aspect of the question. Could you prompt me what the actual question was again?
Matthew, I'm still having a lot of problems hearing you.
Could you repeat this summary of the question?
Well, my question was how do you respond to those who would just say that you would be a voice for politicians?
Yes. The question of, am I a rubber stamp? I guess the first thing I can point to discuss that is I've been endorsed and supported by State's Attorney Rich Gibson. And we've also already discussed today my view and a position on school resource officers. And I can tell you from conversing with him to get his experience and perspective, and he has made clear on various other forums and at places on social media that his view is not my view. But after discussing and conversing with him about it, he was able to support me and endorse me, despite that very significant policy difference, because he can look at how I approach problems, how I think through, and will serve as a useful member on the Board of Education, despite not having agreement on policy there. One of the attacks that I've seen come up to try to smear me has been that in the past, when I've expressed my issue or my position and concerns on issues of national policy, was that it didn't fall lockstep into the Democratic Party, and that was being presented as a smear against me by the same channels that were advertising that the problem with me was that I was willing to acknowledge I was a Democrat. So I found that to be an interesting choice, that that one of the main ways to smear me is that I am a Democrat, and then the other way to smear me is showing that I will hold Democrats responsible and not fall lockstep with the party. So honestly, that has been a bit of a confusing mixed message that I'm seeing. I'm trying to really gauge, what is it that my opponents see as my weakness? Is it that I'm a dedicated Democrat, or is it that I can't follow the Democratic pack? So it's been an interesting bit of messaging to follow. So I guess I'll defer to my opponents to confirm that I won't be a rubber stamp of the Democrats, because as they've seen, that's been my my background and record.
Well, I for one, am glad that you're true to your background. I think that's a terrific thing. And I'm sorry, because I'm doing all this when I'm not on camera, because I am trying to listen. Jason tells me the sound is coming through loud and clear on his end, but there's something up with my phone at the moment. So yeah. But the other thing along those lines, and I will also commend you, because I do not see you jumping into those turf wars on social media. So I also commend you for not lowering yourself to that kind of level. I did think it fair to ask if you know your thoughts or any sort of response. But I mean, you know, getting back to what I asked before about you know, your experiences knocking on doors. I mean, you know, this whole thing about the Board of Education being a nonpartisan race. I mean, I've opined on that many times. Not going to waste the time. But you know, the people who it matters are the people who are voting. I mean, is there any, like, you know, what's the temperature of people whose doors you come to? Do they care whether you're Democrat, Republican, whatever?
Well, generally, first, let me address what my canvases in the neighborhoods have been. It has been primarily contactless literature distribution, because we are in a pandemic. We're in a health emergency. There's a significant and damaging virus still passing through our community, and I won't force anybody into a unexpected, close conversation with a stranger that they're not prepared for. So I have spoken with people when I've been out, when I approach and they're already outside and they're available to have a conversation from 10 to 12 feet away. But most houses that I go to, I just leave my information so they can go and look up and just have that little prompting to go further educate themselves about the race. That said, out of the people that I've spoken to, I have been asked multiple times about what party am I with, or am I affiliated with myself? And the people that have asked, they've been very receptive to the fact that I'm a Democrat. That is something that's openly messaged by my campaign, even though it is a nonpartisan office, because as part of preparing for this, I went out and I've talked to and I've involved people that have participated in school board elections before. I wanted to know, how does this campaigning work? How does it happen? I went out of my way to educate myself on running for Board of Education, as you do. And what I got back, what I found is that, especially in 2018, when Board of Education canvassers were able to knock on the door and talk directly to people on demand as they're going around, a very common question from the voter, it was, what's their party? Who's the Democrat? This is something that the voting public wants to know. And when you're campaigning in 2020 and you don't have the ability to engage everybody in real-time conversations, you have to anticipate their questions and answer them. Because if you're not going to have a chat with most people, then the only way you're going to answer their questions is if you're upfront about it. So my campaign has been upfront with my values, with my goals, and with my party affiliation, because these are the things that voters have been shown to want to know. They want to know who you are, what you're going to do, and who do you choose to affiliate with.
I do have one follow-up. Sorry, Bill, if you don't mind me.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to pass the ball over to you anyway. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left.
Yeah, well, you already gave us an example of one of the more challenging conversations a candidate can have when they're out meeting voters. And by the way, I'm elated to hear you're not out there actually tackling folks or trying to bring them inside.
Yeah, I don't think anyone thought that.
That's what I heard. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, Howard County Neighbors United is not reputable.
I live and breathe by everything Steve Keller says. I mean, yes, voters ultimately get to decide what's truly important. But I'm just curious, in your conversations you may have had with them, in passing, socially distanced, however appropriate, maybe it's a Zoom meeting. Can you think of any examples of a really positive conversation where you walked away just feeling a little bit energized and uplifted? Like you met someone who really cares about the schools and they gave you some really good advice. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I had one conversation very recently that after our initial exchange and a very pleasant separation, it was in a townhouse community. So I went and I dropped on the next door and was still within reasonable speaking distance with the gentleman. And he asked about whether I'd be able to reach out to the federal government about getting more money into education. He intended it as a humorous toss out, but it gave me a good opportunity to go into the question of what else does the Board of Education do besides writing policy. And a big aspect of the Board of Education ends up being the fact that they're elected officials within the community that are tasked with the subject of education. And one of the things they can do with that is go on and advocate and communicate with the other elected bodies. That they do approve the superintendent's budget, but they also have the weight of the seat in the office supporting them to go out and directly contact and lobby to the county council to explain the needs. I'd talk beyond the budget and convince them to fund the school as we need. The same with our state delegation and our congressional delegation. So what started out as a humorous callback from him led to a deeper conversation about how we can approach school funding and how the Board of Education needs to interact with all these other bodies, which is why I'm very pleased to be setting up in this this race going into taking the position, and with existing relationships of I have 3 state delegates within my donor list. I've received endorsements from three delegates, 2 state senators. These are the people that actually fund our schools. So with a pre-existing relationship and their support, that will play well in the future when I need to then take the budget that we've approved and passed and go and contact them and discuss it. And the second part of that conversation on the street there ended up getting into the question of how do we educate? What is the philosophy that our school and our education system all the way up approaches? And unfortunately, a lot of our national approach to education, and as it bleeds down through the levels, it continues, is it's set up to address the labor needs from the late 19th century, early 20th century, where we want to bring our students into adulthood with a basic level of education and the solid ability to then go in to take a job where they perform a task by rote, repeatedly, carry out their career there, and that's what provides the needs of their community. That's what their job demands of them. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in the middle of the 20th century, and especially toward the end, we've removed most of those jobs. We've shipped them out, and our education system still pushes too much into that. Whereas what our new adults need to do is they need to be better able to understand and assess media and the information sources they bring in and the critical thinking required for that. Mm-hmm. Because the jobs and further careers that they're going to go into, so for very few of them will it be memorize a task list and then perform this task by rote for the next 30 years, and that will be your job. Because so many of those tasks have left, and we need those post-secondary educations. So we need our secondary schooling, our high schools, focusing on and directing the critical thinking, the learning how to learn, so that afterwards they can then go on to their additional training that will get them into a role that will provide a career. Mm-hmm. Whether that's for vocations that have to be done where they are, or our welders, our pipe fitters, or or constructions, our trades are like vocational school paths. And we can't outsource any of those. That will continue to provide jobs and careers in the future, but it's a second level of education past high school.
Mhm.
So what the high school needs to be putting them out with is having the mindset ready to learn those next steps or
Mhm.
go into it. And we've got the professional paths on the other side of a college degree, which again, the high school needs to put them forward, ready to learn, ready to think critically, look into, understand authorial intent, and be able to figure out how to evaluate their information sources, make it through this world of news, and especially the sorts of stuff that come through on social media, how to filter through that and pluck out what's important so that they can continue on in our society.
Mhm.
And it's a realignment that locally, state-wise, and nationally, our education system needs to do a better job directing, because a high school diploma is not the end, and it hasn't been the end for a very long time now. And we need to ensure that coming out of that, our students can see where to be able to make their plans and move forward,
Mhm.
instead of thinking that there's a one-size-fits-all solution, or that they can just jump right into their career as their parents, or, well, we've got a lot of millennial parents now, so it's even their older aunts and uncles and their grandparents did, because we've had a big lag in education. And ending that conversation was a good one, because before he'd made the humorous question about how will you reach out to Congress to get us money, he had to listen to the elevator speech, accepted the card, and was, thank you, I'm definitely going to go read up and dig into this. And getting a chance to then talk about thinking about education and how we can move forward.
Mhm.
He was very positive, and he's like, you won me over. I'm looking forward to my ballot now.
Oh, fantastic. I do have one more question I want to ask before turning it back to Bill. And I think this is a really nice spot for it. You've already talked about, your closeness to some local Democratic activists and officials, which obviously is an important part of the job, and being able to have that relational element where you're talking to other policymakers. But just thinking about local organizations for a minute. Obviously, a lot of grassroots support from individuals as well as local community groups, understanding that they're all important, and I get that. Is there one community endorsement that really is meaningful to you on a personal level you'd like to talk about for a second?
Well, I guess I'll just talk about the newest piece of news. I was very pleased this morning to go to my email, and there was an email out to the membership of the Howard County branch of the NAACP.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was ever directly publicly broadcast by them. I received it as being a member of the local chapter. But it had the recommendations to the membership for the Board of Education, and for District 1, I was on there, and I was very pleased and honored by that. But the Howard County branch of NAACP is it's blessed by having the local president is also the state council president, Mr. Willie Flowers. And he's been using his time, his privilege as president, to bring up and discuss things during meetings to look forward to how do we fund school. Actually, we were discussing this even before the pandemic lockdown had come up, because as the Kerwin funding was being discussed, even without the COVID related impacts, we knew that there's a budget issue. How do we address that? And the NAACP is looking at that locally, working to already brainstorm possible solutions of coming up with new revenue streams, things that we can direct into the school system to provide for the funding that we need, whether that's and the capital investment that Howard County schools really need. Our ventilation systems were woefully inadequate and need replaced and upgraded even before bringing up the question of what sort of filtering and ventilation is required for safe large groups in an age of COVID. But so it was a real honor to have them support me, since they're currently making it one of their missions locally is to find ways to help identify and fund the schools. With the recent changeover of the leadership of the Maryland legislature, Mr. Flowers was mentioning that this is a time that we might be able to look into adjusting various laws regarding alcohol in the state to see if can we capture some of the market and interest there to redirect it and fund it into the school system. So I think that's an interesting solution that's worth looking into further and finding out various people's details and suggestions on it. But the underlying aspect of, as a community organization, looking to see how can we find solutions to our public problems that then we can bring to policymakers and really move forward that way. It's an important, effective way to be a participant in the community, to identify the concerns of the community and provide solution suggestions. And I'm really glad that they're a part of that. I find it very valuable every time I get to join and participate in their meetings. And I'm very pleased and humbled and very glad to be able to tell you that I was recommended by the Howard County branch of the NAACP.
And fantastic. Breaking news here on Forward Maryland.
That's right. That's right. An exclusive. I love it. Maybe our first. Matthew, I know we have about, we're about 12 minutes from the top of the hour, and I think at least two of us turn into a pumpkin at the top of the hour. So I wanted to ask you, and this may not be enough time to give this question justice, but I cannot help but scroll up and down my social media platforms of choice and see a thing about this Howard County Public School System hybrid learning survey that's due October the 23rd. And we have talked so much about things pandemic related tonight that it seems silly that we don't ask a direct question about the pandemic, and which is, where are you in terms of, as you're elected to the school board, you'll start serving in December. And what are your thoughts about hybrid learning? And, what would be your posture in terms of being able to make the best decisions for the school system regarding, the possibility of kids going back to the classroom?
Okay. Well, I received that same email today, and as a parent, I've already filled in and provided my response back. My interpretation of what they were surveying about resulted in me answering that yes, if they get something in place that's workable, and my kids would attend it based on the knowing that it's not a binding commitment and I still have the chance to assess what the facts are on the ground later, and that my kids would not be riding on the bus. Sort of relating to what we've already discussed with the environment of the buses and students needing to take it on themselves to abide by the social distancing and responsible group behavior. It'd be a little best to drive for the moment while I'm able to. But as far as your question of providing the assessment as a board member, part of that I will withhold comment on because with these sorts of plans and options, the school system, the administration central office, does a lot of time looking into the contingencies and the planning and the reaching out to various stakeholders and really involving. And then as they had done over the summer for discussion of the first semester, they will produce multiple plans, which will then be brought to the board to decide which ones to either exclude or one to approve or one to use as a basis to then approve with amendments, which, if you remember, that is how the situation that we currently got to was accomplished. The school system had brought forward 3 plans, and after hearing a lot of the questions that were given about them, they decided that one of them was not going to be sufficient. It had too many issues that were being brought up about it. It got removed. And then after some work sessions the next month when it came up again, there were amendments made by the board and then it was approved. So I don't want to dig in too much as to what sort of specific options I want them to bring or what specific vote on it I would take, because it's going to end up coming before the board as a multitude of decisions for them to make that have been researched by a wide range of experts and stakeholders. And the board will use those options to direct their path forward. I look forward to seeing that as it plays out. And
no, I find that a great answer because another there are so many variables, right? And who knows by December where we'll even be with the pandemic. So I thank you for a thoughtful response to that question. Matthew, this has been a pleasure. We're very glad to have had you on again. You have run through the gauntlet twice unscathed, 3 more times until that 5-timer jacket heads your way. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
Just that the election is coming up. Early voting begins on October 26th, and whether it's sending in a mail-in ballot, whether it's putting your mail-in ballot in the drop box, whether it's early voting, or whether it's election day, go vote. Even if, unfortunately, you might decide that I'm not your candidate of choice, please vote. It is an important and critical aspect of our system of government, of our community input. It is how we pick our leaders. It's how we demonstrate the values that we want to move forward on. So to everybody, go vote. And please take some time to go to elect.molyett.com. You can read up more on me as a candidate, what I value, what I want to accomplish, or volunteer or donate. And this election's coming up very quickly, and there's a lot of chance that you can still help out, join in. We have a plan to make it to 10,000 more doors before election day. So anybody that can come out and join in that for 30 or 50 or 100, it's very well appreciated. Go ahead, go to my website, volunteer, and we'll put you to work.
Awesome.
That was great, Matthew.
Matthew, thank you very much. Jason, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
And we will be back on Saturday with interviewing representatives from Howard County Harvest United and learn more about the work they do. So for Jason Boones, my name is Bill Woodcock. You have been watching or listening to Forward Maryland. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Oh, cool. Oh, I think Matthew left.